My mother-in-law believed my husband was the perfect man, the kind of son who bought us a house and carried the weight of the family on his shoulders. But the truth was far darker than she ever imagined. My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 32 years old, and I've been married to Ethan Rivers for 7 years. To everyone on the outside, Ethan seemed like the kind of man every woman dreamed of, charming, dependable, and devoted. That was the picture his mother, Marlene, painted for the world, and she never missed a chance to remind me of it. Marlene Rivers was 62, sharp-tongued, and endlessly proud of her only son. She treated Ethan like a flawless hero, the golden boy who could do no wrong. To her, I was always just the woman who'd been lucky enough to marry him. She carried herself with the kind of pride that made you feel small whenever she entered the room. From the day we moved into our house in Willow Creek, Marlene told anyone who would listen that her son had worked himself to the bone to buy it. She spoke as if Ethan had pulled this miracle out of thin air, like he had single-handedly built the roof over our heads. Every time she said it, her eyes cut toward me, as though she wanted me to feel ashamed for not matching up to him. At family dinners, neighbors' barbecues, or even casual conversations in the grocery store, Marlene found a way to slip it in. "Ethan bought this beautiful home for Claire," she would say with a proud smile, like she was announcing a medal he'd won. "He's always been such a responsible man, taking care of everyone." People would nod, impressed, and I would sit quietly, my face tight in a polite smile, while Ethan soaked in the admiration. What no one knew was how carefully I bit my tongue. I never corrected her, never said the words that wanted to burst out of me. Because the truth was mine alone to hold, and Ethan had made sure of it. Behind the curtain of praise, I kept my silence, even as Marlene's voice grew louder, even as the weight of her words pressed harder against me. Ethan never tried to stop his mother's stories. In fact, he seemed to enjoy them. Whenever she bragged about him, he would lean back in his chair with a smug grin, basking in her approval. And every time, I felt the same twist in my stomach, a mix of anger and disbelief at how easily he let her believe something that wasn't true. Still, I stayed quiet. I smiled when Marlene looked at me with her smug little smirk, and I nodded when she called Ethan the perfect man. I played along, because that's what was expected of me. But deep down, I knew the day would come when the truth could no longer stay hidden. And when it did, nothing in our lives would ever look the same again. When I first met Ethan, I thought I had found someone I could build a life with. He was handsome, polite, and knew how to make people feel special. He made me laugh during our first dates, held doors open, and spoke about his future like he had it all figured out. To me, he seemed steady and reliable, the kind of man who would never let me down. By the time we married, I was certain I had chosen the right partner. Everyone around us believed it too. Ethan had this charm that made people trust him instantly. He knew how to talk about work, about plans, about responsibilities, and he sounded convincing. My mother-in-law, Marlene, especially adored him. To her, Ethan wasn't just a good man, he was perfect. She would brag to friends and relatives about how lucky I was. Her favorite story to tell was about our house in Willow Creek. It was a modest 2-story place, nothing fancy, but it had charm and a warm feel that I loved. Marlene told everyone that Ethan had bought it with his hard-earned money, that he had saved for years to give his wife a safe and beautiful home. She called him the provider, the man who carried his family's future on his back. She repeated this story so often it became her anthem. People admired Ethan for it, and they looked at me like I was the lucky one. But behind all those stories, I carried a truth no one else knew. The house had not been bought with Ethan's money. After my father passed away, I received an inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to give me stability. I used a large part of it for the down payment on the house. It was my money, my father's legacy, that made our new life in Willow Creek possible. I remember the first time I told Ethan I wanted to be honest about it. I felt it wasn't right to let his mother, his family, and our friends believe he had done it all. Ethan's face hardened immediately. He told me it would only cause problems, that Marlene would never accept it if she knew the truth. He said she might think I was trying to take something away from him, and that it would ruin family peace. At the time, I wanted to believe him. I thought maybe he was right, maybe it was better to let things be. So I stayed quiet. I didn't correct Marlene when she bragged, and I didn't tell anyone where the money had really come from. I told myself it was just a small lie, a way to keep harmony in the family. But as I watched Ethan bask in the praise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake. It was my inheritance, yet he wore the crown. And each time Marlene repeated her story, the weight of the secret grew heavier. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was little things that made me uneasy. Ethan started keeping his phone close, never leaving it on the counter the way he used to. He set up a password without telling me, and if I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd tilt the screen away like it was nothing. When I asked, he brushed it off with a laugh, saying work was stressful and private. I wanted to believe him, so I let it go, even though a part of me felt the shift. Then came the late nights. He used to be home by dinner, but suddenly there were endless work meetings and projects that kept him out. I'd sit alone at the table, the food getting cold, while Marlene praised him for being such a dedicated provider. She never saw the empty chair across from me, or how often I fell asleep waiting. Money started slipping through our fingers too. Bills piled up in a way that didn't make sense. Notices came in the mail, red letters warning us about late payments. Yet Ethan's mother still bragged about how generous he was, how much he gave for the family's sake. According to her, he was carrying everyone, but I was the one lying awake at night, worrying about what we'd cut next to make it through the month. Marlene never missed her chance to remind me of my place. Whenever she saw me tired or stressed, she'd say sharp little comments. If only you worked harder, Claire. Poor Ethan has the whole weight of this family on his shoulders. Sometimes she called me a burden straight to my face, her eyes cold and judging. I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that she had no idea what was really happening, but I bit my tongue. Inside, though, the anger was building. I wasn't just upset at Marlene. I was angry at Ethan for letting her treat me that way, for enjoying the picture she painted of him as the savior. He never corrected her. He let her think I was lazy, ungrateful, even useless, while he wore the crown she handed him. That was when I decided I couldn't just trust his words anymore. I needed facts. Quietly, without telling him, I started keeping records. I saved every bill, every statement, every small piece of proof that showed where our money was going and how little sense it made. I kept a notebook hidden away, writing down dates, times, and excuses. I told myself it was only for my own peace of mind, but in truth, I felt something in my gut. Something wasn't right, and one day I might need the truth laid out in black and white. It was a lonely kind of preparation, sitting in silence while Marlene's praise echoed in the background and Ethan disappeared into the night. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the cracks that were starting to split our marriage apart. One afternoon, while sorting through the pile of mail on the kitchen counter, I noticed an envelope that looked out of place. It was a statement from a bank I didn't recognize. My name wasn't on it, but Ethan's was. I almost set it aside, thinking it might be a mistake, but something made me open it. What I saw inside made my hands tremble. There were charges for hotels I had never stayed in. Expensive ones, the kind of places people booked for weekends away. Alongside those were receipts from jewelry stores, boutiques, and restaurants I had never visited. None of it matched our life together. We had been struggling to pay bills, yet here was proof that money was flowing out somewhere else. At first, my mind refused to accept it. I tried to think of explanations. Maybe it was for work. Maybe he was helping someone. But the amounts were too high, the pattern too clear. This wasn't work. This wasn't generosity. This was betrayal written in black and white. When Ethan came home that evening, I couldn't hold it in. I placed the statement in front of him and asked what it was. He glanced at it, then looked at me with that calm, confident face he always wore. Instead of an answer, he laughed softly, shaking his head as though I was being dramatic. "You're imagining things, Claire," he said, his voice smooth. "Those charges aren't what you think. You always overreact." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. He didn't deny it outright, but he made me feel foolish for even asking. He insisted I was paranoid, that I must have misunderstood. When I pressed, pointing at the hotel names and jewelry stores, he leaned back and sighed, telling me I was insecure, that I needed to trust him. It was like a punch to the gut. Not only was there evidence, but he was twisting it, turning the spotlight on me as if I were the problem. For a moment, I almost doubted myself. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But no, the numbers were there. The truth was there. I thought Marlene might offer support if I confided in her, but I was wrong. When I finally broke down and told her what I had found, she reacted with outrage, not at Ethan, but at me. "How dare you accuse my son of something like that?" she snapped, her eyes flashing. "You're just jealous, Claire. You're insecure because you can't measure up to him." Her words burned. She didn't even look at the papers I tried to show her. She waved them off as if they were meaningless, choosing instead to believe in her perfect son. To her, I was just a bitter wife making up stories. Between Ethan's smooth denial and Marlene's angry defense, I felt like I was standing alone in a storm. The evidence was in my hands, yet they both acted like I was crazy for seeing it. Deep inside, though, I knew I wasn't imagining anything. Something was deeply wrong, and no amount of gaslighting could erase the truth that had just come to light. After that night, I couldn't rest. Every word Ethan had thrown at me kept circling in my head, mixing with Marlene's sharp accusations. But no matter how much they tried to convince me otherwise, I knew what I had seen. I needed answers, and I knew I wouldn't get them by asking Ethan again. So I started digging. It began with the bank statements. I went through them carefully, looking at dates and places. Some charges repeated. The same hotel, the same restaurants, certain jewelry shops. There was a pattern, one that couldn't be ignored. With every line I read, I felt my chest tighten. Eventually, curiosity turned into action. I followed one of the charges to a boutique's website. There, on their social page, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A young woman was posing in a dress I had seen listed on the bill. Her name was tagged in the post, Vanessa Cole. She was 29, smiling brightly, showing off expensive bags, clothes, and jewelry. And worse, I recognized one of the necklaces. I had seen the exact charge for it on Ethan's statement. I kept looking, and the more I saw, the more I realized the truth. Ethan wasn't just spending money carelessly. He was spending my money, my inheritance, the security I had built from my father's legacy, on her. Vanessa had been around for nearly 2 years, and Ethan had been living a double life, spoiling her while lying to my face. When I finally let the reality sink in, it felt like my whole world cracked. I had sacrificed peace for silence, had swallowed Marlene's cruel words, and had worked hard to keep our marriage steady. All while Ethan gave away pieces of my life to another woman. Still, when I tried to tell Marlene, she refused to listen. She cut me off before I could even explain. Ethan would never do that, she snapped, her face hard and certain. You're only trying to drag him down. Shame on you, Claire. It didn't matter what proof I showed. To her, Ethan was flawless, untouchable. She saw me as the jealous wife, desperate to smear his name. That was when I understood the truth. I could never rely on her. She would always choose him over reality. I felt completely isolated, like I was trapped in a nightmare with no one to believe me. But inside that loneliness, something stronger began to grow. If no one would fight for me, then I would fight for myself. Quietly, I began to plan. I didn't show my anger anymore, and I didn't confront Ethan again. Instead, I kept collecting information. I watched, I wrote things down, I paid attention to details. He thought I was blind, that I would keep swallowing his lies. But I wasn't blind anymore. I was preparing. And when the time came, I would make sure the truth could no longer be denied. I thought I had already seen the worst of Ethan's betrayal, but I was wrong. One morning, I logged into our joint bank account and felt my stomach drop. The balance was almost empty. The savings we had built up, money I thought was there for emergencies, for the future, was gone. When I asked Ethan about it later that evening, he said he had used it to help with the mortgage. His answer nearly made me laugh out loud, but the anger inside me was stronger than anything else. There was no mortgage. I had paid for the house with my inheritance. I knew it. He knew it. Yet he looked me in the eye and told that lie without even blinking. That was when I understood he didn't even respect me enough to come up with a believable excuse. I also knew where the money had gone. It wasn't to a mortgage or to any kind of responsibility. It was going to Vanessa, the woman who was living comfortably off the life I had worked to build. My father's money was being poured into fancy dinners, jewelry, and hotel rooms for a woman who didn't even know, or maybe didn't care, where it all came from. But the final blow came not from Ethan, but from Marlene. She invited us to dinner at her house, calling it a family night. I almost didn't go, but something in me wanted to see how far the charade would go. Around the table, surrounded by relatives and family friends, Marlene raised her glass and began her usual speech. She praised Ethan for being such a hard-working son, for buying our house outright, for carrying all the burdens without ever complaining. She spoke loudly, proudly, and everyone listened with admiration. Then she turned her eyes to me. With a smile that felt more like a knife, she said, "Claire is lucky, really. Not every man would sacrifice the way Ethan does. Not every husband would provide so much." The room filled with nods and murmurs of agreement. My cheeks burned hot, and I couldn't look anyone in the eye. In that moment, I felt smaller than I had ever felt before. They all believed her. They all believed him. And I sat there, the only one who knew the truth. That the house was mine, that the money was mine, that Ethan was nothing but a thief and a liar. I had stayed quiet for too long, thinking silence would keep the peace. Instead, my silence had built him a crown, and Marlene had placed it on his head. That night, as I drove home, I made a decision. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep letting him use me, letting her humiliate me. I realized the only way forward was to bring everything into the open. If they wanted to worship Ethan as their perfect man, then they needed to see who he truly was. And I would be the one to show them. After that dinner, something inside me changed. I was done feeling powerless, done letting Ethan and Marlene control the story. If they wanted to live in their fantasy, fine, but I would build my own truth step by step. I started by going back through every document I could find. I pulled out old bank statements, the ones Ethan thought I never bothered to check. I organized them by date, highlighting strange charges and transfers. The picture became clearer with each page. The money was draining steadily, and almost all of it was tied to the same places I had already linked to Vanessa. I stacked the papers neatly in a folder and locked it in a drawer. Next, I went for the property documents. The deed to our house was in my name alone, and I held on to that paper like it was gold. It was proof of where the money had really come from. Ethan had always avoided talking about it, but I knew one day he might try to twist the story. Now I had the evidence in black and white. Still, I wanted more. I started carrying a small recorder in my bag, something simple but useful. When Ethan let his guard down, I would ask him small questions, pretending to be casual. More than once, he slipped. He admitted the house had been paid with my inheritance, though he always framed it as if it was a shared sacrifice. Each time he spoke, I made sure the words were saved. Hearing him confess, even in his twisted way, gave me strength. But then I stumbled on something worse, something I hadn't expected. While sorting through a pile of papers in his desk drawer, I found loan documents. At first, I didn't understand what they were, but then I saw it. My name written in shaky letters, a signature that wasn't mine. He had forged my approval to take out money behind my back. My stomach knotted as I realized he wasn't just wasting what I had given. He was dragging me into debt I never agreed to. That was the breaking point. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was fraud. It was theft. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. Quietly, without telling anyone, I reached out to a lawyer. I met her in a small office across town, where no one would see me. I laid out the papers, the recordings, everything I had collected. She listened carefully, her face serious, and told me I had more than enough to protect myself. Walking out of that office, I felt different. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't just reacting to Ethan's lies. I was acting. I was building a wall of proof so solid he couldn't tear it down. He thought I was weak, but I wasn't. I was patient. And soon, he would learn exactly what patience had prepared me for. Marlene's birthday arrived quicker than I expected. Ethan insisted we attend, and though every part of me wanted to stay home, I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. The lawyer had told me I was ready, my folder of proof was complete, and the plan I had built quietly in my mind was finally about to unfold. The house was filled with family and friends, everyone laughing, eating, and raising glasses in Marlene's honor. She was glowing, sitting at the head of the table with Ethan by her side. I kept my face calm, pretending to join in, though my heart thudded hard inside my chest. After dinner, when the room was buzzing with chatter, Marlene stood up for a little speech. As always, she turned the attention to her son. "I couldn't be prouder of Ethan," she said with her wide smile. "He bought a beautiful home for his wife, he supports his family without complaint, and he has always been a man of honor." Her words cut into me, but this time I didn't stay silent. I stood slowly, feeling dozens of eyes turn toward me. My hands didn't shake as I set a folder on the table. "That house," I began quietly, "was not bought by Ethan. It was bought with my inheritance after my father passed. The deed is in my name alone." I slid the property document across the table for everyone to see. Marlene's smile faltered, but I didn't stop. From the folder, I pulled out bank statements and laid them out like cards. This is where the money went. Not to bills, not to the family. Hotels, jewelry, restaurants, and not for me. Gasps rippled through the room. Finally, I held up a photo I had printed, one that showed Vanessa with the necklace Ethan had purchased. For nearly 2 years, Ethan has been spending our money on another woman. Here is the proof. The room fell into heavy silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The sound of papers being shuffled was the only noise. Ethan's face turned red as he tried to speak. "She's lying," he said quickly, his voice shaky but still desperate. "Claire is twisting things. You all know how emotional she gets. She's jealous." But before he could finish, I pressed a small recorder on the table. Ethan's own voice played, admitting the house was bought with my inheritance. His own words filled the silence, proof no one could deny. The color drained from his face. Marlene reached for the papers, flipping through them with trembling hands, her lips moving but no words coming out. Around us, family members stared at Ethan with wide, disbelieving eyes. The golden image Marlene had painted was cracking right in front of them, and there was no way to piece it back together. I sat down again, calm at last, while Ethan struggled for excuses that no one wanted to hear anymore. The truth was out, and nothing he said could erase it. The silence in the room didn't last long. Marlene was the first to break it. She pushed back her chair and stood, her face red with fury. "You're lying, Claire," she shouted, her voice shaking. "You've ruined everything. You're tearing this family apart with your jealousy." Her words stung, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The documents and recordings spoke louder than anything I could have said. Still, Marlene kept going, her hands trembling as she waved at the papers scattered across the table. "None of this means anything. Ethan is a good man. He would never do what you're saying." But her voice grew weaker when she saw the looks around the room. Ethan's uncles, cousins, even his younger sister stared at him with disappointment and disgust. Someone finally muttered, "So it's true then." The weight of the evidence crushed the room. No one could believe that the man they thought was so perfect had been living such a lie. Ethan tried to defend himself, his words tumbling out in a rush. "It wasn't like that. Claire's twisting everything. I made mistakes, but I was only trying to." He stopped when he realized no one was nodding anymore. The support he was so used to had vanished. His family, the same people who had cheered for him at every gathering, now looked at him with shame. And then came the final blow. Vanessa had been invited by Ethan, clearly expecting to play the part of his friend at the party. She had been sitting quietly near the back, but when the truth became too clear, she stood up. Her voice was sharp and cold as she turned to Ethan. "So all the gifts, the trips, everything, you were using her money?" Ethan reached for her, desperate, but Vanessa pulled away with a disgusted look. "You're pathetic," she spat, before walking out without looking back. The slam of the door echoed through the stunned silence, leaving Ethan standing alone. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply gathered my papers, slid them back into the folder, and told Ethan in a calm voice, "You're finished here." The next day, I went to the bank and froze every account that had his name attached to it. My lawyer filed for divorce immediately. When Ethan came back to the house, he found the locks changed. His belongings were packed in boxes on the porch. He shouted, he begged, but I didn't open the door. The house was mine, and he had no claim to it anymore. Marlene refused to speak to me after that night. She clung to her version of reality, insisting I had destroyed her son's life. But even she couldn't erase the shame that hung over Ethan. His family stopped protecting him, neighbors whispered, and his golden image was gone forever. As for me, I finally felt the first breath of freedom. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of lies. Now, with the truth exposed and the door closed behind him, I was ready to step into my own life again. The weeks that followed were heavy with paperwork and tense meetings, but I didn't let fear guide me anymore. My lawyer handled everything with precision, and the evidence I had gathered left no room for Ethan to twist the truth. The forged signatures, the bank records, the recordings. All of it painted a clear picture of a man who had betrayed his marriage and drained money that was never his. When the court date came, Ethan tried to put on his old charm, but it didn't work. The judge wasn't swayed by his excuses or his attempts to make me look unreasonable. Every document, every fact stood against him. The decision was swift. I kept the house, the remaining savings, and full control of my future. Ethan walked away with nothing. Not a single piece of the life he had pretended to build was left in his hands. Watching him leave the courthouse, his shoulders slumped. I didn't feel pity. I felt relief. For years, I had allowed him to enjoy the role of the provider while I carried the real weight. Now the mask was gone, and everyone could see the truth. Marlene never forgave me. She refused to answer my calls and spread her own version of the story to anyone who would listen. In her eyes, I had betrayed her son, not the other way around. But her silence and her anger no longer mattered to me. I had spent too many years trying to win her approval, only to be treated like I was less than nothing. Let her cling to her pride. It wasn't my burden anymore. Life became quiet after the storm. The house felt different without Ethan's presence, lighter, safer, mine in every sense of the word. I started decorating rooms the way I wanted, moving furniture without worrying about his opinion, choosing colors and details that reminded me of freedom. One evening, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, the soft hum of the night around me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for footsteps at the door, wasn't bracing myself for lies or arguments. The silence felt warm instead of cold. It was peace, pure and steady. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, and how it had all come crashing down on him instead of me. Ethan had wanted to be seen as the strong one, the provider, the man everyone admired. But in chasing that image, he had lost everything real. He had underestimated me, believing I would always stay quiet, always keep the peace at my own expense. Now the truth was clear, and the final thought settled in my heart like a closing chapter. Ethan wanted to play the provider. In the end, he lost everything because he underestimated the woman who had actually paid for it all. And with that, I leaned back against my chair, letting the weight of the past fall away, finally free to live on my own terms.